interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin.
Excuse me, Chad. Here is a flash from the Associated Press.
From the White House, the CBS network presents a special address by the President of the United States.
The White House, Washington, D.C. The President of the United States of America.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
My fellow Americans, together we've come down a long road in our fight against drugs, civil unrest, and the epidemic of violent crime throughout America. We have implemented rehabilitation programs and clinics, built new and larger prisons to incarcerate the growing increase of violent criminals, educated our children in the public schools, and aired television specials on how you and I can combat violent crime and drug abuse throughout our country. I'm deeply saddened that our efforts to eliminate drugs and violence are failing. Now we're faced with the growing threat of terrorism. 6 hours ago, FBI agents apprehended a small band of terrorists outside of the White House, attempting to destroy the Oval Office and assassinate your president. Millions of Americans are also plagued daily with the constant threat of losing their lives and families due to the increase of terrorism and civil unrest all across our nation. While we have been successful in many of our attempts to apprehend suspects of terrorism, such as the successful operation 6 hours ago, we do not have the manpower to combat this activity nationwide. It has therefore become imperative to enact special crisis action programs. 15 days ago, I issued a decree and entered in the Federal Register Executive Order 11490. Minutes ago, I authorized the reassignment of control of all transportation, communication, utilities, industry, farms, waterways, public and private schools, medical facilities, and postal service to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Beginning tonight at midnight, every citizen and alien has 72 hours to register at their nearest postal station and will receive, upon registration, special instructions for this crisis. This act will temporarily mandate a national curfew, also beginning tonight at midnight. At this moment, United Nations troops are mobilizing and securing designated sectors nationwide to confiscate all firearms and illegal contraband. America is in a state of national emergency, and I will use whatever force is necessary to combat the terrorists, criminals, drug peddlers, and those looting and burning our cities. Because of the crisis facing our nation, I have expanded Executive Order 11490 into martial law. At this time, the Constitution and Bill of Rights have been suspended indefinitely. It is the duty of all patriotic Americans to understand that this is essential to our national security and continued well-being as a nation.
Now we're going to look at this book. It's a reprint from 1928, Propaganda. It's got a couple of passages in here I want to share with you. It's very interesting here. Got this sign language going down the page here. OK to thumbs up with the fist. Democracy is administered by the intelligent minority who know how to regiment or organize and guide the masses. Really good book. Edward Bernays.
I am now going to start connecting some dots for you. And I'm going to start on page 37, the chapter titled Organizing Chaos. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. Our invisible governors are, in many cases, unaware of the identity of their fellow members in the inner cabinet. We are dominated by the relatively small number of persons, a trifling fraction of our 120 million who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. It is not usually realized how necessary these invisible governors are to the orderly functioning of our group life. Invisible government in the shape of rudimentary political parties arose almost overnight. What is that saying? It was a network. It was a network. Let's go down to the bottom of the page. We have voluntarily agreed to let an invisible government sift the data and high spot the outstanding issue so that our field of choice shall be narrowed to practical proportions. From our leaders and the media they used to reach the public, we accept the evidence and the demarcation of issues bearing upon public question. Next page, 39. There is consequently a vast and continuous effort going on to capture our minds in the interest of some policy or commodity or idea. It might be better to have, instead of propaganda and special pleading, committees of wise men, that would also be wise men and women today, wouldn't it? Who would choose our rulers, dictate our conduct, private and public, and decide upon the best types of clothes for us to wear and the best kinds of food for us to eat or not eat. Some of the phenomena of this process are criticized. The manipulation of news, the inflation of personality, and the general ballyhoo by which politicians and commercial products and social ideas are brought to the consciousness of the masses. And as the need for invisible government has been increasingly demonstrated, the technical means have been invented and developed by which opinion may be regimented, or with the printing press and the newspaper, the railroad, the telephone, telegraph, radio, and airplanes, ideas can be spread rapidly and even instantaneously all over the whole of America. Well, why is it television in there? Because this is 1928, and today we could throw television, movie houses, and internet. Hollywood. And that's all I'm showing from this book, published first in 1928.
Now I'm going to feature this book. This is the oldest book in the set here that I'm using. And it comes from 1890. Patriotism by H.W. Bolton. We're going to see what patriotism is, where it comes from, and how it gets into our system. Yes, sir. We're going to look at a couple of other things in here too. We're going to cover a lot of ground here. Now let's look and see what Bolton has to say well over 100 years ago.
Now I'm going to show you some passages from this book printed in 1890 called Patriotism. And it was put together by Bolton, but there are other people that wrote some things, some stories and some essays that are printed in here. And here you see it. Boom, 1890. And we're first going to jump over to page 165. And this is by George P. Smith. And what this means right here is National President of the Patriotic Order Sons of America, which was an anti-immigration organization. And they came on in the late 1800s, and they operated pretty strong up until the early 1900s. You can look them up. The great principle of true Americanism is that merit makes the man. It places every man on his own 2 feet and says to him, "Be a man, and you shall be esteemed according to your worth as such. To each one according to his capacity." This is Americanism. It is this which has been our boast, which has constituted our country's glory. It is this which we have inherited from our fathers. Our glorious system of free schools throws open the doors to everyone. The child of our poorest man has every opportunity to become a great scholar, and there is no position of honor to which he may not aspire. They carry their advantages to every boy and girl, no matter how humble their position in society. Europe educates a few chosen ones, but America says that every one of her children shall have a fair chance. Now I'm coming to page 193 under the heading School Life, and basically what it says, how do we teach respect of the American youth? Shall I answer? By stimulating his pride in his country, by exalting his estimation of the deeds of his ancestry, teaching the American boy that in his veins flows the blood of heroes, that he is the descendant of the grandest race of all liberty's descendants this world ever had in it, and you will get a race of men. Could be strong men. Man, that's some harsh words there for today, isn't it? As Americans, we have upon our hands the solving of the great problem of the liquor traffic, which is carried on largely by foreigners. And is directly opposed to the best form of government and the mother of all evil. Remember, these were religious guys. Let us look well to our school life, making it one of the conditions of enfranchisement and education in the language, principles, and history of America. Oh boy, we can forget that, can't we? The education of American children should be an American education in strict accord with our Republican forms, presented in one language and made a work of the next page. State and never left to the church. The time has come for us to say something about who should be eligible to citizenship in this country, and to call a halt at the gateway of immigration until they are ready to accept the religion of America and defend intelligently our public institutions. And this can never be done without a system of training such as begets in the individual heart of a self-respect as the basis of national liberty. Sons and daughters of America, let us remember with reverence the fathers and the sacrifices they made in the establishment of the institutions that have made this country what it now is. Inspired with true devotion to God and with love for our country, let us go forward to make war on all law-breaking and law-evading organizations looking for success in the power of God, who giveth all things liberally or freely or kindly to them that walk uprightly. In all our warfare, let us cherish a liberal or free, kind spirit toward all church organizations and men of conviction, denouncing all political allegiance to the Pope and tolerance to his dictation and civil interests. Looks like they were having a problem with these guys back in the late 1800s. Directing our fire on all religions and creeds that strike against home, schools, or freedom of worship. Going to jump over to page 207 now. Chapter 13. But our public school system is in deep and grave peril. The whole nation at last realizes that many agents and agencies are combined for its complete overthrow and destruction. They are thoroughly organized, splendidly officered, and backed by millions of money and men. Though differing with them, we are compelled to always remember two things. They are probably, in the main, conscientious, and their consciousness, their minds, have been shaped and molded by forces antagonistic to our American institutions. My last entry comes from page 299. The same spirit that drove Christ from the homes and out of the temple of old is at work today in our large cities to drive the Bible from the schools and all books of biblical thought. And that's what I've got to show you from 1890.
Next will be The Red Network by Elizabeth Dilling. And we've got several passages in here that we're going to share. Brilliant woman. You can find out a lot about her online. She's, to me, just every bit as important as Nesta Webster. And these ladies were ahead of their time. Ahead of their time. Yes, sir.
Now I'm going to look at some passages from this book by Elizabeth Dilling. See down here, 1935. The Red Network. And I'm going to go to page 13. When over 1,000 communists rioted in front of the Chicago School Board offices, they bore a placard, "We want Soviet conditions here." Some misguided Americans, openly or covertly, are echoing this sentiment. The universities seem to have joined the gutter communists in going red. They unite in using the argument that inasmuch as the American economic system has collapsed, we must have Russian Revolution to right matters. Next is page 21. Right here. Talking about the Red Front, with the Red Front against Hungary, with Red Front for a Socialist Soviet Republic of America. Comrades, decide on which front you are willing to fight. The fist, Red Front emblem, is a symbol of irreconcilable battle. And that's where you get the fist. The fist is the symbol. And it still is today. Moving forward to page 69. Because the Socialist Party generally favors the taking over of the government first by legislative means. In other words, they design these laws so that they can come in and have them collapse on top of themselves. So now you see now you see that all of this is planned out. In the 30s, she was concerned about it. Chameleon-like, the socialist agitator colors himself to fit the group he is addressing, appearing as a delicate pink. I thought that was catchy. That was catchy. Until now, in 1933, the entire Socialist Party rejoices at the socialistic New Deal and radical Roosevelt appointees. Let's jump over to page 73. In 1932, Socialist Party election platform similarly called for total disarmament of the United States, no deportation or barring of alien Reds, free speech, free press, and civil liberties for the revolutionaries, recognition of militant, bloody Soviet Russia, etc. Page 74. Americans who are alarmed at the present socialist administration labeled as democratic may easily turn out Democrats and vote in Republicans at the next election. But how many of the elected Republican officials will be radicals of the same stripe? Roosevelt, their kindred soul. Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Check it out. Check it out. Good writer. Excellent writer. Picking up on page 91, some more Elizabeth Dilling here. Not partisanship, but socialism versus Americanism, there's that word again, is the issue before America now. No socialist Democrat, no compromising, willy-nilly Republican torn between innate American conservatism and internationalist radical pacifism deserves support. Every American who values his home, his liberty, and the future of his children should give himself heart and soul in the next election to the party which gives proof that its candidates will uphold the American principles which have made America great and will offer American voters the opportunity to vote Karl Marx out of office. Next page is 93. What have socialistic experiments ever achieved except deficits or failure? While Russia was primitive under the czars, they danced on holidays and worshipped God with a full stomach. The Ukraine, now starving, was in fact called the breadbasket of Europe. Famine, spy, and shotgun-ridden Russia now turns out more propaganda than produce. And you can kind of see some of Elizabeth Dilling's dark humor there. Now, looking at page 96. When it no longer pays to own property or run a business, it means that capitalism or private ownership is being squeezed to death. Socialism is killing it. Only when socialism is throttling legitimate profits does the big and little capitalists stop investing, that is, spending, and try to hide a little of his fast disappearing money from the tax collector. But the new dealers have devalued even money now. The state seems about ready to gobble up all private ownership rights. Page 98. In Western Europe, under the threat of socialism and Bolshevism, money was withdrawn from productive enterprise in thousands of cases and went into hiding. In this country, political demagogues and doctrines who are at heart socialists, whatever their outward party profession, have been busily engaged in threatening all business enterprise and hampering and hamstringing it wherever possible. What they cannot immediately destroy by social legislation, they try to tax and restrict and handicap to the point of extinction. Page 99. The price of democratic freedom is eternal vigilance. That's a common quote. When a people are too different to the loss of their liberty, too blind to see that unchecked Marxism will result in complete chaos. It is late, but not too late to save American democracy. If Americans will awaken now, where are America's leaders? And there's a passage in there how the socialists have just taken over the city of Chicago and raised home tax prices. Just, I mean, the landlords are just having big problems with the city of Chicago, and that's where she lived. That's where she was from. Elizabeth Dilling, writing in 1934.
Our next book to look at is The Iron Curtain Over America by Beatty. And Beatty was an intelligence officer who worked under General MacArthur, Douglas MacArthur. And brilliant guy, great writer, and one of my dad's favorite books, got his name on the bottom of it. I think on top, no, but he's got it. This is one of my dad's favorite books. He loved it. Now let's see what he's got to say.
I am now going to show you some passages from this book here, probably controversial to some. Got some good information in it though. The Iron Curtain Over America by John Beatty, 1952. And there's my dad's stamp. He likes stamping our books. And I'm going to start off by showing you page 43. Now, as stated previously, John Beatty was a intelligence officer who worked for Douglas MacArthur. And then after World War II, he stayed in politics, and by 1952, he was probably working in the White House, but he did have ties to the White House that we will see. Just as Mr. Reed presents the global picture, the Iron Curtain Over America attempts to sketch in brief, along with other matters, the problem created in the United States by a powerful minority possessed of an ideology alien to our traditions and fired by an ambition which threatens to involve us in the ruin of a third worldwide war. The next chapter deals with the above-board infiltration of Zionists and other persons of the same ideology into the United States Democrat Party. Moving forward, page 45. The second reason for large-scale communist exploitation of the United States was our traditional lack of any laws prohibiting or regulating immigration into the United States and our negligence or politics in enforcing immigration laws when they had been passed. The illegal entry of aliens into the United States is one of the most serious and difficult problems confronting the Immigration and Naturalization Service. There is ample evidence that there is an alarmingly large number of aliens in the United States in an illegal status. Let's move up a little bit. Under the Alien Registration Act of 1940, some 5 million aliens were registered. The third principal reason for the communist exploitation of the United States was the absence of any effective policy regarding resident foreigners, even when their activities were directed toward the overthrow of the government. Thus, in 1950, several hundreds of thousands of foreigners among the millions of illegally in this country were arrested and released for want of adequate provisions for deporting them. Just scroll on down and let you check that out. Yep. Now we're looking at page 47. In addition to its need for more votes, the Democrat Party had another characteristic which appealed to the politically minded Eastern European newcomers. The Democrat Party was a collection of several groups. The Democrat Party is not a political party at all. It's a marriage of convenience among assorted bedfellows, each of whom hates most of the others. Just going to scroll on down, let you look at that. Now we're going to jump up to page 50. Thus, the astute 20th century immigrants of Eastern European origin continued to join the Democrat Party, in which everybody was accustomed to strange bedfellows, and in which a largely non-Christian third force was already well entrenched. Page 53. But FDR, piqued with power of his new office, stimulated by the clique of Marxian and Fabian socialists posing as intellectuals and liberals, and by radicals in labor unions, universities, and his own sycophant bureaucracy, had signed his name to the Kremlin's franchise. He made an actual treaty with the Soviets, giving them the right to establish a communist embassy and consulates in the United States with full diplomatic hospitalities and immunities to Stalin's agents. And it all happened November 16th. Look at that. It was known in 1933 that Stalin and his Soviet regime was beginning to topple, and only its diplomatic recognition by the President of the U.S. and a subsequent vast economic subsidization would make it possible to continue to control the Russian people and expand the Soviets' treacherous socialistic activities throughout Europe, Asia, and America. And we're going to look at some more of that subsidization here when we get back to the 60s. In the White House, some of us knew at the very moment of Roosevelt's deal with communism was a highly detailed report and analysis of the Kremlin's real objective, the sabotaging of Western Hemisphere's social, political, and economic life, and the creation of a pan-American union of socialist states. And that's all I'm showing from this book. Very good book, very good read, and like I say, you have to read it with the associated book.
Next will be None Dare Call It Treason, and that's by John A. Stormer. We've got several passages in here. And he was woke, but he wasn't red-pilled. He wasn't able to put all of the pieces together. And this is, I think, his finest book. And he wrote a few others. But he did have a clue. He did have a clue of what was going on, but he couldn't put all the pieces together.
I'm now going to show you some passages from this book, None Dare Call It Treason, by John A. Stormer. And he was a pastor, I believe a Baptist minister in St. Louis at the time. And I find this caption on the front quite interesting. 1964 is a year of crisis and decision. Will America continue to aid the communist enemy, to disarm in the face of danger, to bow before communist dictators in every corner of the earth? The decision is yours. And this is the, I guess what you'd call the masthead. And you can see all the printings here. They printed up over 3 million copies of this book. It was very popular. Very popular. Now this comes from page 47. The McCarthy story plays up the striking double standard and inconsistency in our society. A murder suspect can be convicted and executed on the strength of circumstantial evidence. It is extremely difficult or impossible, however, to remove an alleged communist, fellow traveler, or incompetent from a government post using the same rules of evidence. He was semi-woke. Moving forward to page 79. Within days after Hall triggered the attack on the ultra-right, the campaign spread rapidly. The unity of the left against anti-communists, which Hall proposed, developed almost immediately. Hunters showed that within a week after Hall's orders went out, similar attacks appeared in major magazines, liberal newspapers such as the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and on the wire service of the Associated Press. In short, the tremendous smear campaign by government officials, the press, radio, and TV against anti-communists followed the exact line put out by Moscow. As a result of his study, Hunter predicted that the communist effort to smear the John Birch Society would be followed by a campaign linking every other effective conservative anti-communist organization to it. He pinpointed a book, The Fascist Revival, published by the Communist Party USA, which purports to tell the inside story of the John Birch Society. And look what he said. The virulent tone of the booklet indicates that the Communist Party would like to create a new Pavlovian trigger word for this period in its psychological warfare, and believes Birchite might be put into the language this way, replacing McCarthyite. The Communists now seek to create a new scare word. I'm just going to scroll it down and let you look at the rest of it there. Now picking up with page 104. It's talking about how they revised all the textbooks in the early 1930s. So scroll down. Education for a New America. Social control. And here he writes about Dr. Harold Rugg, who continued the job of indoctrinating teachers and preparing teaching materials designed to influence the social attitudes, ideals, and behavior of coming generations. His book, The Great Technology, written for teachers in 1933. A public mind is to be created. How? Only by creating tens of millions of new individual minds and welding them into a new social mind. Old stereotypes must be broken up and new climates of opinion formed in the neighborhoods of America. Clearly, Rugg was proposing the destruction of the small businessman and complete government control of every citizen's life and employment. Page 105. The schools were to be used to transform American political and economic institutions and create the new public mind, which would accept complete government control of the individual. Through the schools of the world, we shall disseminate a new conception of government, one that will embrace all of the collective activities of men, one that will postulate the need for scientific control and operation of economic activities in the interests of all people. Completely new textbooks were needed. Rugg wrote them. "14 social studies textbooks Rugg authored. He also produced the corresponding teacher's guides, course outlines, and student workbooks. So blatant was the downgrading of American heroes and the U.S. Constitution, so pronounced was the anti-religious bias, so open was the propaganda for socialistic control of men's lives in Rugg's textbooks that the public rebelled." Now we're moving to page 111. Since World War II, propaganda for world government under the United Nations has been added to textbook agitation for the collectivist society envisioned by Counts and Rugg. The drive, spearheaded in America by the National Education Association, is part of a worldwide movement by UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. So you see UNESCO, it's bad. That is bad. Page 127. What is the net result? The National Council of Churches, its subordinate organizations, and the leaders of many of its affiliated denominations and their publications consistently parallel or follow the Communist Party line, as exposed by Jedgar, our good old pal Jedgar. An independent group of Methodist clergy and laymen, Circuit Riders, Inc. Circuit Riders, Inc. has compiled and published names of over 7,000 ministers and theological school professors who have supported communist fronts and causes. These 7,000, some of whom have supported 100 or more communist causes. For example, the congressional hearings on the much smeared Air Reserve Training Manual cited the names of a few leading fellow travelers in the ministry. They included Walter Russell Bowie, who was affiliated with 33 communist proposals. Page 139. The Indianapolis News editorial then called attention to the death by hanging of Newton Armstrong Jr. Armstrong, 19, was the editor of a conservative student newspaper at San Diego State College in California. His father was a prominent member of the anti-communist John Birch Society. Armstrong's hands, when he was found hanging in a bedroom in his home, were bound behind his back. His death was finally labeled a suicide by the authorities. So what we have today, what we see practically every week, was going on in the mid-60s.
Up next, we have a choice, not an echo. Phyllis Schlafly. We're going to see several passages in this book. Phyllis Schlafly was a lady who dreamed. She was wonderful, great writer, and she put a lot of information together, and she fought for her patriotism and her rights and her beliefs. Fantastic woman. Just recently passed away. She was out of St. Louis, Missouri also, just the same as John A. Stormer. He was a pastor in St. Louis. I'll bet you that these two knew each other. I'll bet you that they knew each other.
Moving forward to this book by Phyllis Schlafly, A Choice, Not an Echo. And she hurriedly put this book together because she wanted to get it out before the Republican convention. And with the help of her organization, she was able to do just that. And A Choice, Not an Echo kind of reflects her statement or standing that whatever a Democrat candidate for presidency said, well, the Republican would come and repeat it and say, oh, me too, me too. And that was so obvious when Barack Obama would come on television at 10:30 in the morning and say something, and then on the 12 o'clock noon news, you'd have John McCain, who was running at that time with Sarah Palin. He'd be coming on TV, and he just kept saying, me too, me too, me too. I don't know how, and I'm like, this is so obvious. This is so obvious. He was a Me Too candidate. And we're going to jump over here to page 15 under the heading here, Communist Agents in the State Department and the AIC. State Department Security Officer Scott McLeod listed 648 State Department employees as having had communist activities and associations, and 94 as pervs and probably pedos. So, hey, that's a pretty good percentage there, isn't it? So, the same problems that plague us today were there 50 years ago. Moving forward to page 50. Again, John Dewey, who was way out there, Dewey's defeat did not bother the kingmakers at all. All they wanted was to make sure there was a candidate on both tickets who would rubber stamp their America Last foreign policy. See, so the America Last foreign policy had been in place for 60 years or better. I think this is cute. It is time the American people wake up to the inaccuracy of the Gallup poll. Page 64. Speaking in Buffalo, New York, General Eisenhower promised to clean out the State Department from top to bottom. He approved the campaign slogan, corruption, communism, and Korea. General Eisenhower and all Republican candidates in 1952 campaigned on the Republican Party platform adopted by the 1952 convention, which promised, get this now, we shall eliminate from the State Department and from every federal office all, wherever they may be found, who share responsibility for the needless predicaments and perils in which we find ourselves. They're all drama queens. That's what we have in Washington today, is grandstanders and drama queens. Look at these reporters who harass any politician who's pulling for the American people. We shall also sever from the public payroll the hordes of loafers, incompetence, and unnecessary employees who clutter the administration of our foreign affairs. See, there's been a big problem recently with people who are not elected officials, the bureaucracy controlling foreign affairs. There it is. This is kind of cute here. There are no communists in the Republican Party. Well, I guess probably in 1964 there wasn't. We never compromised with communism. Oh, and we have fought to expose it and to eliminate it in government and American life. A Republican president will appoint only persons of unquestioned loyalty. Excuse me, a lot of holdovers in there. Reduction of expenditures by the elimination of waste and extravagance. How extravagance may be flying your entire family all overseas, at the expense of taxpayers, so that the budget will be balanced and a general tax reduction can be made. To the dismay of the kingmakers, who are the elites, call them your superdelegates or whatever you want, your CFRs, United Nations, whatever, as well as of the liberals and Democrats, the Republican Party closed ranks, aided by Senator Joseph McCarthy's television analysis of candidate Stevenson's soft on communism record. Republicans offered the people the choice they had been denied for 4 presidential elections. The result is history. General Eisenhower got elected. Moving up to page 113. Now, you remember I showed you 20 years ago in Round Table magazine the article, in the article there, of America's debt to its allies. America's debt to its allies. So now we are going to look at America's debt to its allies. Here it is. Overlooking Red Russia's failure to pay its World War I and World War II debts to us of $12.3 billion, its post-World War II debt to us of over $500 million, and its seizure without compensation of American private property worth billions in Iron Curtain countries. There you go. That's America's debt to its allies. But just put in there England, France, the rest of the small countries in Europe. That's America's debt to its allies. You betcha. Now, moving forward to page 116. This is my last entry from her book. And there's a lot of good captions in this book. The woman wrote with humor and with intelligence. She's brilliant. And I encourage anyone to get a copy of this book. You can read it fast. It's very easy. It's a good book. They even favor the Democrat policy of giving foreigners the right to exchange their dollars for gold or silver, but of denying this right to American citizens. See, back in the 60s, Americans couldn't own gold. The only way to stop the spend and elect policy of LBJ, supported by the kingmakers, the superdelegates, and their lackeys, is to vote for candidates not controlled by the kingmakers. And all through the book, she calls the people who decide your president the kingmakers. Your diplomats, ambassadors, and everything like that. Head of the clowns, your head of the security agencies, she calls them kingmakers.